Welcome back to another episode of DVNTv. This is a show all about humanizing our Black queer experience. I'm your host, Micah Marquez, and joining me today is the beautiful and amazing Keith Boykin.
Hey,
Keith, how you feeling today?
I feel great.
Awesome. It's so good to see you.
You
You look
too.
great as always.
As do you, as
Thank you.
always.
And that's actually where I want to start today because I want to start at our initial meeting. I first met you.
Okay.
So I recall, at least, and you may have a different recollection, but I recall first at least seeing you and meeting you for real at Deviant.
Really?
Yes.
That's the first time I met you?
I
Is
think
it
so.
Deviant? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, man.
I just
I remember
remember
first time I met
seeing.
you.
I remember seeing you, your abs, of course, and just being like, okay. And I feel like I had likely seen you online before then, but that's the first time I came and gave you a hug and a proper circuit hello, which is a kiss on the lips.
Right.
And it was later on. It was much later on that I began really researching you online, finding that you were and are this like incredible advocate and journalist, and just like doing so much to push specifically the Black community and just like our nation, the narrative forward in such a positive way. And so like from that, I really had this experience where like I saw you as what I looked at as just like perfectly human, and then I saw this superhero, and so I came up in my mind with this metaphor of Superman and Clark Kent.
Clark Kent, Superman?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I just feel like, people are multifaceted, and sometimes people want to put you in boxes where you're just this one-dimensional thing.
Yeah.
I think for most of my early career, so to speak, like in the 90s and 2000s, I was just the Black gay activist.
Yeah.
And I was a writer, Black gay writer, and all this kind of stuff. And so then I kind of just like retired from all that and decided I wanted to move on and do other things.
Yeah.
And then I got involved in more politics, which is where I started my life and career. And then I guess like that whole other thing kind of, it felt like it, for some people, it was like two different lives, but it was really the same thing. It was like, I'm still a Black gay man, but I'm just doing more political things now. But I just don't, talk about it as much. I started inviting in people to my life back in 1990. That was when I was in law school, and I wrote a letter to my mom, spoke to my father. It was a whole big, long ordeal for me. And it wasn't really difficult, it was very positive. Everybody was really positive in the way they responded, except for my grandmother, who made a big scene at my graduation, my law school graduation. But besides that, everybody was really positive about it. And then by the time I left law school, graduated in law school in 92, I went to work for Bill Clinton. Everybody knew I was gay at that point. It wasn't even a secret. But the weird thing for me was that I was there at the time when it was right at this transition point in America where LGBTQ people were just starting to be openly, publicly accepted in spaces like that. So before that, there weren't any openly gay people in the previous administrations that I knew of. And then I became, like a year after I came out, I was like the highest ranking openly gay person in the Clinton White House, which is so crazy to me, like me of all people, how'd that happen?
And when you were like in this role and like, essentially being this, like you said, the highest ranking out LGBTQ person, were you having to like conform to respectability politics and like present a certain way, or were you able to like be your full self as,
Well, I don't think I knew what my full self was at that point, so I didn't feel like I was conforming to an identity. I just felt like this is all I knew.
Right.
And there was no Deviant party back then at the time, but I was just out and about living my life. I would go to, back then, it's funny, I was in DC recently, and I visited a friend who lives in Navy Yard.
Yeah.
And he has a beautiful place there, and I looked around from the rooftop of his building. I looked around the entire 360. The only building I recognized was the U.S. Capitol. And the whole area that he lives in used to be the gay club scene. That's where, that's where all the kids would go and hang out. Trax was there, The Edge was there, Wet was there. That was where all the Black gay men would hang out.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a seedy area. Now it's completely disappeared. I feel like it was just a natural thing back in the time. In the early 90s when I was out in DC, you would go out to Trax or go out to Edge, you would see lawyers and doctors and political people and everybody just out at the club, you know, all having a good time.
Yeah.
And there were masked and femme and tall and short and dark and light and just all different types of people. And it was just a beautiful thing to me.
So this definitely draws on like a different sort of line of questioning that I have now. One, what are your, like hearing you reflect on what DC used to be and how it used to bring people together, particularly in the queer community.
Chocolate City.
Where, like, how do you feel about gentrification and like what it's done?
Yeah, that's not a difficult question. It's a problem because, you know, in some ways, a lot of us are gentrifiers, even though we don't like to see it that way. Because many of us come from the suburbs. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs. I hate the suburbs. My family still lives in the suburbs, but I'm a city person.
Right.
And ever since I moved to a city years ago in Boston, I've never not lived in a city. You know, I feel like there's got to be a way to have all the assets and resources and the banks and grocery stores and bars and restaurants and nightclubs and vibrancy of life that comes from gentrification without displacing the people who already live there.
Right.
You know, without outpricing them, without moving them out, without like forcing people to go live somewhere else. Where I lived in DC, I lived in Logan Circle in DC at 1615 13th Street. And it was a great transitional neighborhood when I lived there. I lived in a beautiful house, which I should have bought, by the way, because when I left DC, the owner offered, I'm embarrassed to admit this, the owner offered to sell it to me for $300,000. I don't want this house for $300,000, it's not worth it. It's probably worth millions now, But I didn't really want to stay there. I wanted to go to New York, but at that time, I loved DC because it was such a diverse community. That area in Logan Circle where I live, there were all different types of people, different races. You saw drag queens walking up and down the street at night, you know, and it was a lot of street workers and stuff like that. But by the time I left, in this whole process of gentrification, after they built the Whole Foods there and everything, by the time I left, there were no black people left on my block. Yeah, I was the last one. They all left to move to Maryland, you know. And then all these white people started moving in, and then they really built up the area. Right. It's like, well, we kind of gave them this property that now they have taken over. Yeah. And even in places where there used to be a black presence, it feels like the white presence has come to sort of take that land back, and it's sad to me. Back in the 90s, you go out and people were just being out having a good time. Yeah. They played house music, which nobody listens to anymore. I think hip hop killed house music in the mid to late 90s. But it used to, when I came out from 91 until 96, I'd say, you go out anywhere. You go to the Catch in LA, you go to Tracks in DC, you go to the Octagon in New York. Anywhere you go, Atlanta, wherever you go, you're going to find people black men listening to house music. Yeah. That's all we listen to. Yeah. That was because you hear the stuff on the radio, you hear that when you're in your car, but when you go to the club, you hear the house music. Yeah. And then you go out nowadays, it's the same music you hear everywhere else. Yeah. And I feel like I don't feel like the club experience is for me anymore, in part because of that, but also because, you know, I don't really like the whole, I probably shouldn't be saying all this, but I'll say it anymore. I don't really like the whole idea everybody just goes around and sits in their little sections, you know, the VIP section, they get the bottle service and all that stuff. People you already know. I like to interact with people when I go out. I don't want to just go out and be with my own group of friends. I can do that at home. I'd rather go out and mingle with people and interact and meet people. I'm like, my theory, and I don't have any proof for this, but I'm not 100% sure on it, but I'm going to say this. My theory is that the black community was more open and accepting of black gay people in the 70s and 60s and 70s until HIV/AIDS. Yeah. And HIV/AIDS comes along in 1981, and black people were disproportionately impacted by that. You know, when AIDS first came out, there was the 4 H's they said you had to be worried about: homosexuals, hemophiliacs, heroin users, and Haitians. And if you weren't one of those 4 groups, then you didn't have to worry about it. But then we realized it wasn't just those 4 groups, but black people were disproportionately impacted from the very beginning of HIV/AIDS. And a lot of black gay men started to respond to that by going into the closet, creating this whole DL thing, but also starting to become more what they quote unquote masculine. That introduces the beginning of the homo thug thing, which comes like a decade later in the 1990s, where we start to feel like we have to fit in order to not be perceived as gay. We have, because if you're gay, that means you have HIV/AIDS. If you have AIDS, then you're stigmatized. All these different, this negative language that we were learning about ourselves from our community, while the black community, I think, was becoming more conservative about those issues during that time too, because of this whole HIV/AIDS stigma, this whole idea that they didn't want this attached to the black community as our identity. So all these things kind of contribute to this whole sort of sense of this changing culture that we were living in, this dynamic. And black gay people have always been the generators of culture. And then suddenly we become sort of the followers of culture, I think, in the late 90s. And then, I'm glad that we're kind of reclaiming our role as the creators instead of the followers.
So you really were like stand out, if you were like living through the 80s and 90s, both like AIDS epidemic and the crack epidemic, and you have this like generation that is kind of turning away from the ideas of liberation. Sexual liberation that was really big in the 70s is kind of dying off now. Right. How were you able in those times to sort of maintain self-identity when your community was going like?
Well, I wasn't out in the 80s. I graduated from high school in 83, college in 87, and law school in 92. I came out in 91. And during the 80s, I was aware of HIV/AIDS. I had a friend who I was told died of AIDS, but he didn't, I discovered later. But I wasn't directly impacted like a lot of my peers were, who were out. And then by the time the 90s come along, I met a lot of people in DC and Oakland and San Francisco and New York and places I lived in Atlanta who did pass away. And that had a tremendous impact on, I think, our ability to transmit culture from one generation to another. There's a whole wealth of knowledge in that generation, the 80s, 90s generation, that just disappeared because the people weren't able to transfer it from one person to the next, one group to the next. And that's sad.
I love your mind. And another time that I got to like really see your mind in action was at the Native Son Awards. Do you remember speaking on stage that day?
I remember Don Lemon was drunk that day and he denied it. But yeah, he called me out. But that was a fun experience and weird at the same time. But yeah, I remember that. I don't remember what I said, but I remember being there. Yeah.
I'm gonna remind you just a bit of what you talked about, because I remember very particularly being overwhelmed with joy when you hit that stage and spoke, because you spoke very candidly to the moment that we were in as a culture, as a people, and particularly what's happening to our trans community. And here we are in a room full of like black, gay, elite, cis men, and you called us to recognize our privilege. And you asked like, you brought the question of like, what are we doing, or how can we mobilize, and how can we, make certain that we're not waiting for it to come directly at us, but how can we care about our trans siblings? And I was just, you tapped very directly on the notion of empathy. That
I remember speaking. I didn't remember it being as eloquent as you just described it, but
it was more eloquent.
But sure. I'll take that for what it was worth. I appreciate it. Yeah. I think that you're onto something though in what you're saying, because we do have privilege. And I always tell people privilege is a relative thing. That everyone has privilege relative to someone else. I mean, you may not think of it, but by virtue of the fact that we live in this country, many of us have privilege. I know I travel a lot, as do you, outside the country. I know whenever I travel outside the country, I see how much privilege I have relative to other black people from other places, especially black Africans. If you go to Europe, they love black Americans. That's why James Baldwin's welcome, Josephine Baker's welcome. But they don't love black Africans. They hate black Africans. They don't want them there for the most part. So we get treated differently. I also remember just traveling through the Caribbean. I remember going to places, where was it? A couple of times I went to Barbados. I did not have a good experience. I'm sorry for all the Bayesian people here, but I had a couple of bad experiences in Barbados where I couldn't get a taxi cab, where they gave taxi cabs to the white people, but not to me. Couldn't get a space on the beach at the Bridgetown Beach, whatever it's called, Boatyard Beach, because they were catering to the white people instead. I feel like, that was weird too. But for the most part, my experience has been very, very, I think, one of privilege when I traveled as a Black American. And I remember a couple of times, I probably shouldn't say this too, but I'm going to say a few things I shouldn't say. But I remember a couple of times being in places like in the DR, in Cuba, in Colombia, yes, where I was at a nightclub, a bar, leaving the bar, nightclub, and with my American friends and with some other people we picked up there. And in one instance, I remember very specifically in the DR in Santo Domingo, the police came as soon as we turned the corner, and they tried to arrest all of us. I said, I'm American, soy americano. And they let me and my friend go, and they took the rest of the Dominicans and put them in jail. Damn. I don't know what they did, but you know, they just put them in jail. When I used to date my Cuban boyfriend in Havana, we would go hang out, and they don't let the Cubans go into the hotels there because they think they're gonna do whatever.
Same thing in Brazil.
But we would go hang out, and we would get stopped on a regular basis because they thought he was like hustling this American guy or whatever or something like that. But when we told them we were together, they, you know, sometimes they wouldn't believe it. But it's just there's a lot of privilege you get as an American that you don't get as a citizen of other countries. But I guess the whole point you're saying is not just about that. But I think in terms of the trans community and the way the Black LGBT community interacts, or Black gay men in particular interact with trans people, I think we have to remember that, you know, we're all in this together. And I think one of the best things that the LGBTQIA plus movement ever did is to incorporate all those different groups, because it would have been easier just to splinter them off and say, well, just focus on the gay men, which is what a lot of people want to do, because that's, you know, it's low-hanging fruit, so to speak. It's easier to accomplish. But then you leave all these other people out abandoned. You know, Dr. King said, no, injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And I think that we have to really be conscious of how we manage that. There's a great poem from Pat Parker, the poet from the 1970s, which I used to quote all the time, and I don't remember it as well now, but it's called "Where Will You Be?" And she says over and over, "Where will you be when they come?"
So I guess advancing this conversation just a bit, there are a lot of Black folks who saw the results of this last election and are, you know, tapping out, you know, or at least we're expressing that sentiment online that, you know what, we're not stomping for the Latin community anymore. Y'all voted for this. You know, you didn't vote, you know, in full tandem against Cheeto, and now you're going to get whatever the fuck comes towards you. What do you say to Black folks who are just exhausted of, you know, trying to look out for other communities?
Well, you know, I had this conversation last night at a house party I went to in Inglewood, where a younger Black man who's a journalist was making similar argument about how he's been to a lot of these different events where Black people and politicians get up and make these speeches, but nothing ever changes, and you know, they're tired of being engaged and invested. I understand that, and I wish I had the answer to tell those people exactly what to do, why I feel like they should be motivated, but I can't make somebody else be motivated or inspired. I can only tell you this, that that's what they want. They want you to be depressed. They want you to feel like you have no choice. They want you to feel like that your options are limited and you have nothing, there's nothing you can do except sit back and just let it all happen. Because once you resign to that, it makes it easier for them to do whatever they want to do. Yeah. And trust me, they're not finished. That's what I think people don't fully appreciate. This is just the beginning. I mean, just think about what's happened in the past 3 or 4 years. They got rid of affirmative action. They got rid of DEI. They got rid of abortion, the right to control your own body if you're a woman or a person who can have a baby. They've taken away basic rights. They're trying to ban books. They are literally banning books. They're trying to take away Black history. They are firing Black people left and right and replacing them with unqualified white people. They're bringing in white people from South Africa at the same time they're deporting Black and brown people. Yeah. And this is just the beginning of the process. Yeah. Where else do you think it can go from there? If anybody out there really legitimately thinks that they're going to just focus on the Latinos and deport them and then not think about us, they're completely disillusioned or delusional about the way the world works. Right. I remember back in the day, they used to use this term shock and awe, which is a war term to refer to how they would soften the enemy's defenses. Like you go in with shock and awe, you attack them with missiles and you destroy their defenses, and then you send your ground troops in. We're in the shock and awe phase.
Yeah.
They're dismantling all of the defenses,
Yeah.
so that when they come in with the shock troops and the ground troops, there won't be anyone left to defend us. There won't be any way to defend us, and we can't just sit back and pretend that this is not happening.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I've heard some people say, well, we've been there before, we're black people, we've lived through slavery and segregation. Yes, I get all that, and that's true. And we are resilient people, and in some ways I think we can survive this in a way better than other groups can. But I think what's unique about this situation is that we've never been in a situation with someone who is on the verge of imposing dictatorship in America. There is hope in coalition building, although it's hard, but it's necessary. I go back to another essay that I think is important, an essay by Bernice Johnson Reagan on coalition building, which she wrote in Homegirls, a Black feminist anthology. And she talks about coalition building is like you go into the coalition and you're fighting. It's a struggle. You're not going to agree with all those people, and you come back to your own community and you get some sort of comfort. But it's not a place of comfort all the time, because we don't always agree on what our goals are. Yeah. But we also understand that there is strength in numbers. You know, when I was in law school, I was the leader of a diversity campaign for student movement. We were fighting for greater faculty diversity, and we put together 7 different student groups: the Black students, the Hispanic students, the Native American students, the women students, the LGBTQ students, the Asian American students, and students for disability rights. We brought them all together, and we sued our law school. We fought for greater representation and diversity in the faculty, because it was just, we realized that we had more power and more strength if we came together in a coalition to do this. Right. And the school resisted us, but eventually after we left, we ended up winning, because they started bringing in all these different people. They didn't want to admit it while we were there, but we made them, even though we lost our case, which we argued ourselves all the way up to the state Supreme Court, we won the case in the court of public opinion, because we forced the school to have to defend these discriminatory hiring practices.
Focusing, keeping it on you for a second. What kind of, what intrigues you about a man? Yeah, what are you interested in? What attributes do you look for, physical and or otherwise? What's your type?
Why did I not expect this question to come? Well, I guess I had to make a division between type for dating and type for sex.
Let's hear both.
Oh, Lord. Well, I'm at the point now, I've dated so many different people. I've had so many different relationships. I don't consider myself to be a relationship-oriented person, but I've had several long-term relationships. And I'm at the point now, I don't think I would date anybody who, I wouldn't seriously date anybody who isn't at least 40 years old, which is a new thing for me, because I'm 59, I'll be 60 this year. So I don't really want to date anybody too young for me.
That just made me sad for myself and a lot of people.
You're married, boo.
But still, took hope away.
So I just feel like, for sex, there's a whole different conversation, but for dating, I was talking to somebody in LA last year. We had like this relationship, but it wasn't like a dating relationship. It was more of a sexual relationship. And he was younger. He was 29, just turned 30. But it was a good experience. And the thing is, at some point, he wanted something more. He wanted to be in a relationship. And I understood that, and I told him I didn't want to be in a relationship with him. Okay. And part of it was because of his age. Okay. And at one point he said to me, I want somebody to wine and dine me, because we were just getting together, having, sexual encounters. Okay. And I said, I want somebody to wine and dine me too. And I think he was prepared for that, because I feel like I don't want to be in a relationship to take care of anybody, and I don't want to be in a relationship to have somebody take care of me. Yeah. I want to be in a relationship where we're supporting each other. If I'm going to be in a relationship, and I don't really buy into the whole top-bottom thing. I've never bought into that whole thing. I don't buy into the masculine, feminine thing, or gender roles. You have to do this role or that role. So I just kind of like somebody who can sort of meet me in the middle and work with that.
So Clark Kent is versatile.
Is that what we're asking here? I wasn't saying that.
I'm just going off of
that's a
context
question.
clues
That's a
here.
question I never answer because I always tell people back in my day, I don't ever remember hearing the words top and bottom until at least sometime in the 2000s.
Okay.
And all throughout the 90s, I never heard anybody use the word top or bottom, unless maybe a white person, but never heard a black person ever use the term.
Fucking figure it out.
You meet somebody at a bar, club. You mess around a little bit in the club, kiss or play with each other, then you go home and you figure it out, exactly. But it wasn't like, but nowadays I think the app culture kind of forced everybody to sort of identify themselves, like, okay, I'm this, I'm that.
So what are you looking for now? Are you just like interested in, fuck buddies, or do you have any interest in like a serious relationship? These are the burning questions on Deviant.
God, Lord mercy, I was not ready for all this. I guess, I'm not opposed to a relationship. I just I don't feel like I'm seeking a relationship. I feel like if a relationship comes to me, I'm open to it. But it has to be the right person. And I don't really meet the right person that often. I'm struggling with how to answer this question because a couple of stories I want to share, but I don't want to share them because it might be revealing things about people and that I don't want to talk about. And so
that's fair.
I guess I don't know. I'm okay where I am right now. The funny thing is I have a different experience, I think, with this than most people do. Because I hear a lot of people say they can't find anyone to be in a relationship, anyone to be serious with. I have the exact opposite problem. Every time I meet somebody, they automatically move to marriage or dating. I never meet anybody who just wants to be a fuck buddy. They're just like, when are we getting married? I'm like, wow, can I not just have a good time?
You're handsome as hell. Incredibly intelligent, accomplished, you know who you are, you have worldview, it's like all the things. So I know that the comments are going to be like, Micah, you didn't dig hard enough to find out.
What is it they want to find out? I don't get it. Like,
the people want to know, like, just
what have I not answered?
No, I think you've answered well enough, but definitely there's going to be a lot of interest, just more interest and intrigue based off this conversation.
It's funny because I don't know. I'm not on any app, so I don't really know where people meet each other. That's one of my, whenever I meet people, I always ask them, especially younger people, I'm like, where do you meet these days? Because I don't know where people meet. Yeah. If I go out to a bar, I don't meet anybody there because nobody's out anymore. If I let's say I kind of like house parties, but people don't have them as often. Yeah. But I feel like you have more of an opportunity to meet at a house party. And a nightclub, I'll never meet anybody at a nightclub. But
well, y'all can meet Keith at Deviant. Keith, I want to now reflect on that. What is your sort of take on Deviant? And I guess let me preface it by saying we do have this mission of freeing the minds and just experiences of Black queer folks. We think that in that place of liberation lies innovation and creativity that's otherwise untapped. When we're constantly just like living in a life that's worried. But how effective do you actually think that is? And this wraps in all of our conversation.
How effective is Deviant at doing that? From my point of view, I think Deviant is very effective, but I'm probably not your target audience. Your target audience is probably a lot younger than me, though. So I feel like, I've been to a few of your events, and I've been to your events where I've been LA, New York, Atlanta, DC. I've been to Deviant events in 4 cities. My favorite one of all was in New York at the, the Boom Boom Room, whatever they call the one at the hotel, the rooftop in Chelsea. Lebain, yeah. That was so much fun. I love that. It was such a sexy space with the little jacuzzi and everything and the 2 floors. It was really nice. Yeah. That was my favorite one. But the one I had the most fun at, probably shouldn't admit, probably was in DC years and years ago, the first one I went to. I was with like 4 or 5 other people, and we were all having a good time. We were all there by ourselves. I mean, just enjoying ourselves, dancing with each other, and all had our shirts off, everything. We were just like getting into each other's, groove and everything. That was a lot of fun, Nice. It felt very different from any experience I'd had in a long, long time.
Do you feel like having that experience is like the freeing breath of fresh air that you need to sort of like get back into your being Superman?
I mean, I'm not really owning this whole Superman thing. I guess I just feel like it's just part of being a human, And I think one of the reasons why I'm not on any apps is because I feel like people don't let you be a human. Like I remember when I was on the apps like 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, I would meet people and they say, "Aren't you Keith Boykin, that writer guy? What are you doing here?" And, oh my God, like, can't I just live my life, whatever. And one of the reasons why I left DC, honestly, is because when I would go out to a bar or a nightclub in DC, like random people would come to me and start talking to me about politics. I don't want to just be, I guess that's the way they felt they could communicate with me, but when I'm out at a bar or a club, the last thing I want to do is talk to somebody about politics.
Yeah.
So, but people want to do that with me. So unless you're cute, then I might want to talk to you about politics, which I shouldn't say no, but it's true.
Okay, so I do have one final question for you.
Okay.
What does just like Deviant mean to you?
For me, I think Deviant is a place and a space for people to be themselves, to be free, especially for Black gay men, Black queer men, to have a safe environment where we can explore our identities and not feel confined by pre-existing definitions. And so I really appreciate what you've done in the whole team in creating that space.
Thank you for like sharing your voice, your mind with us today, and your time and presence is not taken lightly at all.
Thank you, Micah. You're the best. I love you.
Oh.
I can't tell you how much that I really appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you. And folks, that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us on another episode of DVNTv. This is a show all about humanizing our Black queer experience. I'm your host, Micah Marquez, and thanks again to Keith for joining us on today.
Thank you.